we support some of the largest banks across the world, as well as a number of stock exchanges and capital market infrastructures, or FMIs, in addition to asset managers and allocators and administrators. And then we have several other non-financial services organizations that we also support. So got a kind of breadth of experience across the business.
Amazing. Thanks, Phoebe. Ed, do you want to mention something about our cyber capabilities?
Yeah, sure. So the cyber team here at Thomas Murray is just over, it's probably about a year and a half old now. So fairly new to the organization, but not necessarily new to each other. So we have I guess a robust history with regards to who we've worked for before. So a lot of us previously worked at an organization called Kroll, who specialize in instant response. The likes of Sariji and myself have come from kind of Big Four consulting. And then in order to make sure that we're providing the most up-to-date and relevant kind of information around trends and best practice, we've basically thrown ourselves at the community and joined a large number of these professional bodies that you see on the right-hand side. So yeah, new to Thomas Murray, but a very experienced team.
Super. And Ed, do you want to just continue with a short introduction for yourself before we dive into the content?
Sure. Thank you so much. So a director in the Thomas Murray cyber security practice. As previously mentioned, kind of Big Four experience. I did kind of 5 years at PwC, and then before that I was actually in industry working for a manufacturing organization. I specialized in kind of GRC and kind of proactive engagement. So anything that's pre-breach.
Amazing. Phoebe?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Managing Director of Third Party Risk Management at Thomas Murray. So I've been with the firm around 10 years, and I'm responsible for our Orbit Risk platform, which is our kind of third party risk management tool, and also how we deliver a lot of the counterparty monitoring services to our client base.
Amazing. Thanks, Phoebe. And I'm Shriji Toshi. I'm a director within the cyber risk practice. Like Ed, I am leading the charge on DORA for Thomas Murray from a go-to-market and delivery point of view. And I warmly welcome Ed and Phoebe on this last session. For people who have joined us before, this is our standard poll question. We just want to get a sense of where the listeners are joining us from. So if you could provide a view of where you are joining us from, that would be great. It just gives us a feeling from a diverse background of the listeners.
I always find this absolutely fascinating. The reach of kind of Thomas Murray and the client base, and the outreach that we've done on the likes of LinkedIn means that we tend to get a fairly interesting population of attendees. So yeah, I always like to see the results of these come in. So if you can, please do select any of the categories or the one that's most relevant to you. If not, make it exciting and go for somewhere you'd want to be from, I guess.
Well, we do have a lot of listeners from UK, which is not surprising, but we do have diverse people joining in from Romania, from Lithuania, Greece, France, Hungary, Croatia. So quite a number of European member states from multiple. So really appreciate it. The next, the standard poll that we do is around what sort of organizations your organization is associated with from a DORA point of view. So there are various subcategories of subsectors within the financial services, and or you can select ICT third party service provider. So which is quite topical for this session. So as I'd mentioned, please participate in the poll. It is always very interesting to see what sort of listeners are joining in.
Yeah, interesting to see whether this is mostly people that are conducting the third party risk, or actually being monitored themselves, and maybe we'll have a mix.
No, we a large number of it is ICT third parties, but we do have banks, electronic money, EMI, people from EMI, from CSDs, investment firms, crypto assets, which is interesting. Yeah, and most of them are ICT third party. So again, quite topical. Hopefully, you'll find this session interesting. We dive right into the content for tomorrow. For this session, what we planning to run through is overview of where we are from a regulatory text point of view. In fact, just an hour ago, or little over an hour ago, there is an update on one of the regulatory text. So we'll discuss that. We'll share our initial thoughts on for financial entities on meeting the TPRM requirements from a DORA point of view. What has been the impact of DORA requirements on ICT third parties? There are few scoping questions that are fairly important. What are the various ICT third parties in the context of DORA? We'll kind of deep a bit more detail into that. What we've heard challenges for the financial entities and ICT third parties in meeting DORA requirements. We'll discuss those. We'll give our thoughts and how we've seen. We recommend or client adopt some best practices to address these challenges, and we will share recommendation and key takeaways. We'll follow it up with a session for question and answers. But we like to keep this quite interactive. So if you have at any point a question, feel free to ask it through the chat functionality. The session is being recorded, so the recording will be made available. The slides can also be made available upon request. So hopefully you find this as insightful as possible, as we intend to do. And please ask questions. We love for us to be challenged and ask relevant questions. Again, I think we all know where we are from a DORA standpoint. It is now applicable and it is now live. There are breadth of financial service entities or financial entities in scope, including ICT third-party providers. Phoebe, you want to give an overview of why ICT third parties are such an integral part of the DORA regulation?
Yeah, so I mean, first, just to give a sense of the scale, the ECB reported in February 2024 of the 109 significant institutions that there were 17,051 service providers, of which almost 6,000 of those were supporting critical functions and close to 5,000 were external providers. So the average number of external providers was 57, and this could range from anything from one third party to 936 providers, which is obviously, quite a major task to assess, determine the criticality and monitor those on an ongoing basis. And then when we look at ESMA results or kind of statistics, they highlight that 15,000 ICT third party providers are actually serving 1,600 financial entities, of which 9,000 are supporting critical important functions. So as you can see, there's a vast number of entities being monitored and doing the monitoring, as well as, when you start to look into this, there'll be additional sort of concentration risk considerations there as well. So if we flick on to the next slide. Just to give an illustration of the impact of unmanaged risk, so why it's important to monitor third parties, I suppose. So down the left-hand side, we've got some examples of events or kind of findings that you might discover from the third parties as you're going about your third-party risk assessment. And you're essentially trying to ultimately avoid that red box on the right-hand side, so avoiding getting any increased risk of any reputational, legal, financial or regulatory loss to your organization. And so, for example, cyber attacks, it could be a direct spillover from that cyber attack that leaks into your organization and leaves you exposed. Or, as it could be for both cyber attack and a few of these other items, it just means that you would then be unable to deliver your service or have a delay in the delivery of your service, which would have a knock-on impact on the operational resilience of your organization. So other factors that might cause a delay or inability to deliver your service might be things like financial instability of that third party that's critical to the service you're providing, any change in delivery locations that are not reported or picked up, any corporate structures in sanctioned jurisdictions that would become in scope potentially of new regulations or new sanctions, as well as, say, ineffective environmental or labour practices, for example, that could particularly impact on the regulatory compliance and issues there, which may cause kind of reputational hazard issues to your organisation. So obviously this is just an example. There's a wealth of issues that could be highlighted, and we probably won't dig in too much more to this today, because I think everyone probably understands the importance of doing it, but it's actually, how does this impact the DORA, or what does the DORA regulation mean that I have to do now?
Yeah, indeed. Thanks, Phoebe. I think we all appreciate, the risk associated with third parties, but I think the numbers say that third parties have become such an integral part of day-to-day operations of any business, including the financial service entities, and hence the regulator has such a high focus for this specific area when we're speaking about digital operational resilience, and that's why we see such stringent requirements being placed on financial entities to manage this risk. Now we look at some status of the level 2 regulatory text. Now we're focusing on the most right-hand box, which is around managing ICT third-party risk. Very importantly, I don't know how many of you followed it, but just an hour or hour and a half ago, the EC has rejected the RTS on subcontracting. It is basically saying that RTS is going beyond its mandate, where they want to monitor even the subcontracting parties, and they are asking for the ESS to relook at that. It is expected that Article 5 of that RTS on subcontracting will be dropped, but it's to be seen. So very importantly, there was one missing piece of the puzzle from a point of view of ICT third-party risk management meeting DORA requirements, and that RTS has now been rejected. So it brings in some sort of uncertainty for organizations who wants to be a top of these requirements, but it is what it is. I think if there is a supervisory action, or at least a request to do by the competent authorities, they have to factor in that this RTS is not yet approved, and hence these requirements are not yet been either processed or worked upon. Guidance on meeting DORA ICT TPRM requirements. Summarizing, Ed, you want to weigh in and share, very briefly, what are the regulatory requirements in context of TPRM from a DORA point of view?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So the first one here really is a common theme across the DORA regulation. It's all about kind of senior management accountability and responsibility. So this is such a critical risk for businesses that it shouldn't be kind of hidden within the bowels of an organization. The whole point of DORA is that it is encouraging management to be ultimately involved in the management of risk within these critical areas. So ultimate accountability and responsibility at the top is fundamental. Number two is something that I always kind of smile at. Anytime there's reference to an inventory, any reference to a catalog or documentation, but essentially understanding who the third parties are, and also doing an analysis of them to understand which of your third parties are supporting your critical functions. Sounds obvious, but the reality is in a lot of organizations this isn't done. We saw some of the stats earlier on around the scale of third parties within organizations as well, so that has to be a consideration as well. The due diligence and ongoing assessments you've identified them, you know which ones are important, kind of crack on and manage them appropriately. Number 4 is a really good one. Good in the sense of it's something new. Actually having in place strategies for exiting those critical third-party relationships. So what does it look like if you terminate your contract with your cloud service provider? What does that look like? How are you going to exit? How are you going to shift off of the services that you're so dependent on as an organization? And then lastly, the mechanisms that you use to kind of enforce SLAs and the management and the obligations that you place on third parties, making sure that the contractual elements are incorporated and basically align with this new regulation. So from top to bottom, accountability, visibility, ongoing assessments, exit, and then also kind of enforceability.
Super, thanks. And well, on the first one, I just like to add, I think typically what we've seen is where does third-party risk management sit within the context of an organization? We have seen it sit at a procurement level, sometimes at a risk function level, sometimes even at a compliance level, and that is not known. And hence, I believe forcing a senior management to own that specific area is fundamental, because it forces organizations to place it at one place and not have multiple stakeholders trying to do piecemeal third-party risk management. So I think it's fairly important. We are going to look at what goes into doing all those risk assessments, and how do we think a structured approach to third-party risk management would look like. Phoebe, you want to, I think there are a lot of people who would have significant experience of doing third-party risk management, but getting everyone on the same page. What does a risk assessment of a third party look like?
Yeah, sure. And I guess even though we're looking here at predominantly IT third parties, the scope of the third party risk areas that are covered is not limited to just say operational or cyber risk. It's really looking at all risk components that ultimately could have a knock-on impact on your organization. So risk domains such as operational and cyber, absolutely essential. Privacy, a massive area, looking at the use and handling of data, which is incredibly important. And then looking at things like sector specific risks. So ensuring there's adequate asset servicing and policies in place around product delivery and such. ESG, so environmental, social and governance, commitments or kind of policies. Also financial instability, looking for the financial kind of risk there, if there's any signs of any kind of issue or insolvency, risk of insolvency. Any legal issues, anything surrounding SLAs or contracts, IP rights and so on. Fourth party, so looking at your third parties, and we'll get into that in a little bit more detail as we go, and regulatory compliance. So of course, ensuring that the third parties are doing what they should be doing in terms of avoiding sanctioned jurisdictions and having the right sort of corruption and anti-bribery policies and practices in place.
Yeah. As Phoebe mentioned, even though the scope within DORA is ICT third parties, the risks to be assessed are overall. So I think this is what we believe could be an exhaustive list. There are entities that kind of combine multiple risk areas. It's up to the organization to find the right balance. This is what we see in our experience. And how would you recommend, Phoebe, that what is a structured approach of getting on top of all of these risk management requirements?
Yeah, I think just what the point you just made was that it was a good one, that it doesn't have to follow those exact risk domain headlines that we had there, and groups can decide how they want to compose their risk assessments. But what is fundamental really is that there's a third party risk framework in place. That means that you're not just looking at an individual risk assessment, but there's a whole kind of management around it, a structured approach to manage the entire process of monitoring your third parties. So looking at at, the governance and your third party risk policies, down to reporting and oversight, which are obviously apply at each of the different levels and feed up into your governance or body. And then looking at the various components. So who are your third parties? Where are these stored? What categories of third parties do you have? How are you tiering them in terms of criticality? And what is your process and procedure around that? In terms of risk domains, the ones we just identified are some examples, but what are yours? And what are your questions? Do you have a questionnaire? Are there additional data feeds that you're pulling in? What's your methodology look like? Are you using a platform to help you deliver this, to make it more efficient and easy for you to manage that? And what do your workflows look like around it? So the entire life cycle management might be from, say, your initial assessment, so conducting an inherent risk assessment that would then determine the criticality, as well as a review of whether that third party is supporting critical functions. Contracting and onboarding, so important to get the right documentation in place and ensure you have all the relevant information you need at the start of the agreement. Going through to ongoing periodic monitoring, and that the actual frequency may be determined by the criticality or the tiering, the categories that you've set, through to issue remediation. So if you've identified that there's a problem, how are you resolving that? What is your kind of risk management? I suppose, what is your how flexible are you willing to be in terms of what the information that you're getting and how you're going to respond to it, and terminating if they're either towards the end of the contract or you're ready to kind of complete that relationship. So there's various components and things to think about which take you beyond, say, just an initial questionnaire. But yeah, there's an entire sort of framework that makes sense to put together to ensure that you've got a robust sort of third party risk management position.
It's just
your insights.
cool. Thank you. It's worth bearing in mind as well. We've got lots of IT kind of service providers kind of on this call. So this is what you'll be subject to. This is what's kind of coming down the line from your perspective. So the initial assessment, expect that to be more rigorous. The contracting and onboarding, expect there to be additional kind of negotiations and the clauses that go in around kind of the DORA compliance, ongoing monitoring and assessment. This is what's going to happen. A lot of this probably you're already subject to, but just expect kind of greater volumes of it, greater kind of depth in terms of the question sets that are going to be asked and the evidence that will be needed. As we saw, it's not just an IT problem. It really is a case of being able to demonstrate appropriate kind of financial controls and that you're not a risk to the organization that you're providing IT services to. So yeah, I just want to kind of flip it on its head and say, look, this is what's coming.
No, I think that is a great point, as we also have ICT providers, and I think they have to look at it from their context that, this is the level of assessments and due diligence that a financial entity is expected to conduct on their ICT third-party providers. But for organizations that do not yet have adopted a full-fledged TPRM framework, I think from my experience, when the European Banking Authority came out with guidelines on outsourcing, banks did take some time to reach to a stage where they had a robust TPRM framework. So there was a journey to be undertaken. It's not that you would, I think that the expectation is that this framework is in place from day one. So there is an element of walking on a transformation journey on how you manage TPRM risk if you did not have anything in place. The idea is, like Phoebe mentioned, it brings in a lot more structured approach to, seeing what all elements you have to kind of cover in order to be on top of compliance. Now, another poll time, we just like to hear your thoughts. How comfortable are you from your journey point of view in terms of, complying with the requirements of TPRM? from a DORA point of view? PB Ed, your prediction?
I think third party risks in this, or particularly the groups that will be joining, are probably most of them will have had some kind of third party risk management framework or process in place. So it'll probably be cleaning up the edges, perhaps to reflect DORA's additional requirements, potentially extending for making sure that they're covering all subcontractors. I expect we're somewhere between A and B, but.
Ed, without looking at the poll results.
Yeah, I'm not going to disagree with Phoebe. Being the third party risk management lead here at Thomas Murray, but I think organisations that are kind of highly regulated traditionally have done better in this space. I think the only thing that might be reflected in the polls is the fact that we do have those ICT third party service providers. So I guess hopefully they're answering the question is, how confident are you in responding to those requests that come in? And there, I think we might have a little bit of a kind of a gap in this.
Yeah, but the results are B has the most response. I think A and B is pretty close. If you look at it, we had it covered before regulation emerged, and we've taken steps to ensure regulatory compliance. So, and there are still C, but I think it's quite evident given the spread of the organizations, because we also had crypto providers in it, which was not essentially regulated in the way you would expect a banks to be regulated or a CSD to be regulated. But it's good.
C is fair, I think, in the context of particularly DORA's requirements, where there are still some outstanding questions potentially around, whether your third party constitutes an ICT third party, for example, which I think we'll get onto as we go. If there are any other questions, feel free to pop them in the chat.
Yep. Super. Yes. A good shout. We've not had a question so far, but I guess we've not gone to the complicated part of DORA. I guess we are slowly getting into that. What we thought would be interesting for our listeners to understand the context of ICT third parties from a DORA point of view. So within DORA, there is explicit definitions of what constitute of an ICT service and third parties, and there is a full list that it's highlighted in the following slide. So we will speak about that very shortly. So that's a ICT third parties. Now within DORA, there is also a reference to ICT third parties providing services to critical and important functions of financial entities. So from a financial entity point of view, all your ICT third parties are in scope of DORA requirements. As per the definition in Annex 3, there are additional requirements that you have to enforce if those ICT third parties are providing service to critical and important functions, which is a mandatory requirements within the earlier area of DORA, which is ICT risk management framework, which mandates identification of critical and important functions. So these two are requirements more from a financial entity point of view. Now, the impact on ICT third parties is depending on whether a financial entity classifies them or have mapped them to providing service to a critical and important functions. They may have additional requests from a contracting point of view, from a review point of view, from these financial entities. This is one impact on ICT third parties. There is a third layer or a third context for ICT third parties, which is critical third parties that are to be designated by ESAs. So we have the register of information that needs to be submitted mostly by all competent authorities in first or second week of April. Post that, the European Supervisory Authorities, ESAs, would go and identify and designate ICT third parties that they deem are critical from an operational resilience of the overall financial market in EU. Now, For such ICT third parties, there would be a lead overseer that would also be designated, and that lead overseer will perform an assessment on the critical third parties from the context of what is the risk they bear on the overall financial market of EU. This has nothing to do with financial entity context. This is everything that is over and above the financial entity context. This is going to be organized through a joint oversight team for which the recruitment is already underway by the ESS. So this is well in progress. A major input that is required in this is a register of information that will come, like I mentioned, in the early by April 31st, if I'm not mistaken. That is the 30th. Sorry, when all the competent authorities needs to submit the register of information back to the SS, post which the SS will start the designation. So I think it's fairly important to understand these three context or three layers of context for the ICT third parties under DORA. Hopefully I've not confused the audience any further. If there is, do share it. Now let's look at what are the various services that constitute for an ICT third party service provider. This is as per the Annex 3 of the ITS on Register of Information, where they provide 19 odd line items. Now, most of this is pretty straightforward. Like, there is little gray area, at least how we've seen from an interpretation point of view. So anything with ICT project management, development, ICT help desk, security management services, ICT facilities, those are white. There is, I think, more XN0 or black and white, quite easy to kind of judge. However, you have the services like provision of data or data analysis. A marketing company could be providing you with data services through a platform. Now, would that then constitute of ICT third party? So it goes beyond the remit of traditional ITS providers. It's how the financial entities are consuming this data becomes fairly important, and how they are obtaining or availing the services becomes very important. That is something that I would just like to draw. So within the 19, there are a couple of them that go beyond the remit of traditional IT or IT enabled service providers. Again, here all others are pretty straightforward, less of a confusion, black and white services. IT consulting services also form parts of this, or ICT risk management service also. So for example, our clients would have to put us also in the service provider list as we are helping them navigating through the DORA compliance requirements and helping them implement. So we'll sit under the bucket of ICT risk management or ICT consulting, depending on what kind of services we are providing, or both. So we would also need to be included in the register of information and have the contracting, etc. linked to it. I hope this is a bit clear. Phoebe, Ed, anything more to add from your side?
It just highlights the scale of the number of third parties that are going to be picked up by this. And as you said, the devil's in the detail. ICT consulting, would you have classified that as an ICT service within the context of a piece of European legislation or regulation? Maybe not in the past, but having the ITS and the RTS kind of approved and signed off adds clarification. Luckily, this is one of the areas where we have got confirmation that that's the case. So, have a long, hard look at the organizations that you're part of, and start making those lists.
Yep. We have a question. Do you consider a sub-custodian monitoring service provided by Thomas Murray to be an ICT service under DORA? I would say yes, because I'm not sure of the model that you adopted, because we have a white label model or even a SaaS model. So if it's the SaaS model, then we are a SaaS provider through which we deliver the sub-custodian monitoring. So yes, we would be considered as an ICT service provider. On similar lines, because of the nature of business that Thomas Murray was in, I think one of the most common questions we used to get, me and Ed, always being thrown at from a scope point of view, is and Phoebe, I think you'll also vouch that we had so many conversations around this, is if I'm a financial entity providing service to another financial entity, uh, and delivering that financial service through an ICT component, am I to be considered in the scope of DORA with the lens of ICT third party? I think that has been one of the most pertinent questions since past 6 months. Thankfully, there was an FAQ released a couple of days back or last week around this that clarifies on how to arrive at a response. I will walk you through with these questions and the output of it. But if there are still questions, feel free to kind of raise it to us. So again, the context is, for example, let's I'm gonna make a very uh, uh, non-realistic example just so that it becomes fairly clear for everyone. You have a bank uh, that is availing some corresponding banking services in, let's say, India. So you are a European bank availing corresponding banking services, any of the corresponding banking services from a bank in India. Uh, and there is an ICT component included as part of these services. So the question is whether this has to be considered as an ICT service under the DORA regulation, yes or no. Now, the first qualifying factor is, does it constitute of an ICT service as per the Annex 3? So we saw those 19 lists. Does it fit any of those buckets? If the answer is yes, then we go on to the next question to qualify it. If the answer is no, automatically not in scope from a DORA ICT third party point of view. Then we remove. The next qualifying question is, if the financial service that is being provided that has an ICT component, is it regulated under the jurisdictions of any legislation in India? If that's the case, then the answer is no. It is considered as a financial services. So, for example, if the corresponding banking services includes, let's say, sub-custodian services or a cash correspondent services, this has an ICT component. These two services are regulated under Indian law by either the RBI, so the Central Bank of India. Then this does not constitute as an ICT service. It constitutes as a financial service and hence not in the scope of DORA from an ICT third party point of view. So you don't have to include this in ROI. Now, for whatever reason, the same bank in India provides, let's say, digital locker services. So, you can store your documents. So they are offering that services. Highly unlikely, but like I said, hypothetical situation, but just to ensure clarity. So this is an ICT services provided, but this digital locker is not a regulated services under RBI, and hence this has to be considered as an ICT services provided by the bank in India, and hence it has to be included in ROI and it has to follow all the TPRM requirements, including contracting. Phoebe, Ed, does that make sense from an example point of view? I know we've had multiple discussions just to iron this out.
Yeah, I think we have discussed this. So there are a few circumstances, I suppose, where financial services would not be regulated by within their jurisdiction. But I guess this leaves it open to the possibility, and we were sort of brainstorming what those situations might be earlier. So yeah, interesting to kind of consider.
Does this conflict the intra-group agreements? There's a question, Helen. So not necessarily. Again, the qualifying, it does not matter whether it is group intra-group services or not, as long as it is ICT services, and then you follow the flow chart. So within the scope of DORA, the requirements are to be considered even for intergroup ICT providers in the same way, except for you don't have to undertake financial diligence on them because their condition better. So other than that, most of the requirements are same as for intragroup providers. A quick poll here is there a good understanding of the ICT third parties?
Yeah, the question that was put in the chat about kind of intergroup relationships is kind of a really kind of astute question. I think it highlights some of the complexities that we've seen in the market around organizations which are in scope and then receive services from entities that aren't that aren't in Europe, or potentially are classifying risk slightly differently. Some notification requirements then become out of alignment, or potentially don't have that kind of formal contract in place that goes down to the level of detail that's needed for DORA. So yeah, absolutely kind of fascinating when you get down to that level and start unpicking some of the relationships that exist within businesses.
Yeah, indeed. And the poll results is mostly B, which does make sense because of the clarity lately, and few indicated work in progress. And there are few who have absolutely clear view of that body, which is great. So I think quite aligned on this output. Just kind of conscious of the time, we also want to share our insights on the challenges. Before we get to that, one additional poll just to get a sense of how prepared are you from a register of information point of view.
And the date of entry for the register of information was
most in I'm giving a broad range, but it would be in the first and second week of April, if not earlier, in most of the member states. Like there is, I think Germany has given a fixed date. Most have given a range. So interestingly, we have mostly 6 and C and B. Yeah, hopefully, as you progress down the line, it becomes more clear. Speaking of that, Ed, do you want to share your insights on the challenges that we've seen organizations face from a financial entity point of view?
Yeah, the ROI is a kind of a new concept, so that is tricky. Like, there's no two ways about it. The level of complexity and understanding within the organization that you need to have, and the mapping across different artifacts is tricky, and the lack of the official template and the multiple reporting formats, because no two supervisory bodies kind of want it in the same kind of format, is difficult. So there's no surprise there. Hopefully we can provide a little bit more guidance on that later on. Anything to do with contracting is always a pain, regardless of whether it's DORA, previously GDPR, or whatever to do with kind of data localization or contracting is always going to be tricky. Particularly as soon as you mention that you'd like to update one element to the contract, all of a sudden the rest of the contract is up for negotiation as well. So yeah, just the practicalities of that. briefly touched upon this with the ICT service provider relationships, and from a group perspective and pan organization, tricky. The third and fourth and fifth parties, knowing the extent to which you should have visibility over those, it is just something that is unfortunately the way the world works, with kind of multiple tiers of risk. But having kind of visibility as far down the chain as you can go, I think, is ultimately the advice that we would give. And then just trying to do it all within the time period that we've got. The level of insight that's needed to ensure that you're hitting all of the requirements, but then the volume that you need to do. So with the 9,000 parties, even if you've got kind of 100 or whatever, it all of a sudden becomes an absolutely massive task. So way back when, at a previous organization, when GDPR came into force, one of the organizations that I knew that was part of the FTSE 100 had 10,000 separate third parties that they were having to assess. There's going to be no reason why this is any different. That was a different industry, but ultimately, when you start to look at some of the big organizations, you see the challenges of scale there.
Sure, Ed. I think a couple of points that just like to kind of build on to what Ed mentioned. So on the ROI, I think one of the key things that I'm noting is, in case if you're in multi-jurisdiction, there are regulators that are asking to be reported in multiple formats, very weirdly. So Luxembourg, CSV, Germany, XBRL, CSV, Belgium, 4 different formats in which you can submit our ROI. And that kind of, firstly, there is no live template available from an ROI point of view. There is a dry run template for which there was an update, and then having different formats in which you need to report. So that is a challenge. I think using technology platform to solve this is massively useful if there is volume. So if you're doing anything above 15, 20, and then you have to report the supply chain element of it, it becomes fairly complex. So we would recommend technology platforms like Formalize to kind of issue ROIs quite easily. And formalizing ICT service provider relationship, we've done so many work in past 6 months that our financial entities leveraging some form of group IT in order to deliver their services. And we've seen the challenges around having contracting done because they're an intergroup. It was not formalized. What should go in the contract? Do we also need to do SLA monitoring? Those are the questions that we typically get. So we've seen organizations tackle it very differently. One have taken a very, very proactive approach of documenting everything, considering it like an external ICT third-party providers. And having, crossing all the T's on the contracting element, detailed source. Others are trying to get away with high level service description. So, but it's a challenge that we've significantly seen, especially in entities that rely, on group service providers. The group could be an financial entity or it could be an ICT provider. So depending on where it sits. Now, just hopping on to another poll, and there is a question in have other financial organizations received fees from existing vendors when requesting DORA addendums? I think we don't typically, Helen, get involved in the commercial discussions between our clients and their third parties. So I don't think I would be in a position to comment on that response. But Phoebe, from a Thomas Murray point of view, I don't believe we are asking for more fees purely because there's a new addendum in.
No, I don't believe we are. I think that's an interesting one. If anyone else has a view in the chat, then please do add it in. I suppose it would be determined by the level of additional sort of requirements that were being asked. But I think on the whole, you'd expect that this would kind of be expected.
Yep. And please put in your poll responses. What we're looking to understand is what kind of challenges is been dealt with at an organization level, which is more challenging. So you could select multiple. I think runaway winner currently seems to be updating contracts, which I am not surprised. And knowing the subcontracting, so the ICT value chain, those seem to be quite in in the lead. Few have manual processes as a challenge, which is an easier problem to solve, and few have reporting register of information. Any thoughts on the poll result before we jump into challenges for third parties?
Just generally, when it comes to contracting, the contracting bit is the start. So making sure that you've got kind of appropriate SLAs and KPIs attached to anything in contracts is I guess where the real value comes from having those contracts updated. So yeah, I would say that the start of the contracting is, well, contracting and updating contracts is just the start of the broader challenge, I guess, with kind of ongoing management of those third parties.
I agree with you.
Super. And Phoebe, you'd like to throw light that you see it from a third party point of view, because we are also subjected to a certain degree of extent.
Yeah, true. So I guess the obvious one would be increased resource burden in terms of responding to additional assessment requests. That kind of goes without saying to some extent. I think there's also the lack of clarity at times whether your organisation would be considered an ICT third party supporting a critical function, and I guess it's just worth keeping that communication line open to determine that. As we've said and seen here from the poll, coordinating large numbers of legal addendum requests that come in could be a challenge. I think one way to sort of tackle this is to actually put in place an addendum that you as a third party can say this is ours, and make that available to clients to review, and that ensures you kind of manage the process from your end. In terms of identification of subcontractors, so making sure that you're aware of your third parties, and then making this information available to your clients, and the extent to which you need to make sure that you're doing that if you weren't before. As well as the lack of detailed requirements of the ESA's oversight expectations. So this would be applicable to critical ICT third parties, but I think there's more to come in terms of that information.
Yep. I noticed there were few ICT third parties. If you could, see from your context of what your thoughts are on this, just to kind of, get a sense. It will also possibly, kind of make it interesting for financial entities who are joining to see it from their perspective, like from a perspective of ICT third party. So hopefully we can broker some conversations and break some ice for financial entities to work seamlessly and collaborate with third parties in getting over the line. Yeah, we have a fairly equal distribution across. No, we increased resources. So the first one, the third one, the fourth one is where. So identification of subcontractors, increased burden on resources, and coordinating legal addendums. That is from the viewpoint of third parties. Really, yep. I think if you look at financial entities and third parties, both are trying to solve the problem of the addendum piece, which is very strange. Both have to achieve it. Now, I believe there would be at one point where it all comes together, and this is what we would like to summarize it with. So, I'll not read all of it. But from my point of view, and Phoebe and Ed, then I'll kind of let you summarize your thoughts. Integral part of DORA is financial entities and third parties working together, because like it's mutually benefit. If the operational resilience of ICT third parties is enhanced, it will automatically enhance the operational resilience for the financial entities. So there is kind of this synergy to be achieved, and hence very important that there is a coordinated effort to tackle the challenges. I think from a financial entity and from a third party point of view, what is important is leverage technology as much as possible. There is technology available which is not cost prohibitive anymore. It used to be the case to manage risk. Now there are technologies available that are not cost prohibitive. So leverage technologies for ROI, for third party risk assessments. From a third party's point of view, look at something like what Microsoft does or Amazon does. They have some concept of trust center. See how you could achieve something like this in a more cost effective way, and find efficient ways leveraging technology to respond to the multiple questionnaires that is gonna hit you fairly soon because of the due diligence requirements. I think preparing internally both on contracting and SLA side goes hands in hand, requires a form of communication line being open between the financial entities and third parties. Phoebe, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think just to reiterate in terms of, ensuring that communication lines are open and having those kind of the platforms and capabilities, tools, I suppose, in place, that means that you can communicate and share information and have that that kind of framework set up and managed.
Yeah, I think you've got to look at your third-party risk management framework and identify where the low-value, high-effort tasks are, and look to automate as much as possible. There's no excuse for having to answer or for issuing questions in Excel, or having to answer them in Excel. That is not the way to do this en masse on scale. So, all of these kind of components need to be kind of addressed with a pragmatic lens, and find a
with any additional questions as well which are coming through now. Be easier with tooling to answer them and in follow on years. So yeah, I think hopefully this will be the more burdensome, and then it'll be kind of easier to address from once this kind of normalizes.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's an interesting point from Ricardo. It would be interesting to hear any commentary from network management group of financial services, what challenges they are having, if any. We love to hear our thoughts. We are at the top of the hour, but if you have any such challenges, we love to hear from you and help you address it. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. You can use the QR code to book a meeting with us to get some initial insights on your issues. We really appreciate you spending this time with us. We've done this 4 sessions. Appreciate all of you joining so far. Proactively asking questions is great. The session will be made available for everyone who's registered. Slides, you can request it. Will be shared very easily. If you have any DORA related issue, challenges, reach out to us. We provide DORA related consulting services, more broadly cyber services also, and we have a platform, as we alluded, from a third party risk management, and we also can support organizations struggling with the challenge of register of information through our partners. Again, thank you so much. Have a good afternoon, good evening, or good day if you're starting your day from US. Keep in touch and follow Thomas Murray for more updates on DORA and other topics, all risk management.